So there is a cliche, a phrase that we are accustomed to using that says, Rome wasn't built in a day. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean that Rome wasn't built in a day? When we say that or hear that, what's kind of the meaning behind that?
Good things take a long time.
Okay, good things take a long time. It's not something that just generally happens overnight.
9 months.
Yeah, 9 months. That's right. That's right. There's a waiting period that often accompanies good things that happen in the world, in our lives, or things that we are trying to build to better whatever it is, society, our own lives, whatever social structures we're looking at. Now, that being said, I want to ask you, can you identify a moment, either in memory, your own memory, or just from history, that you could say maybe defies this cliche? A time that you can point to say, okay, that moment was a turning point. I just got finished, I know this is incredibly nerdy, but I just got finished listening to a great course on turning points in medieval history. And it was wonderful because it was talking about all these different occurrences that at the time, some of them didn't even seem like a big matter at all. And yet they have continued to have ripple effects throughout history. And others that at the time everyone said, this is the moment. This is the thing that's changing history. Later on really was a small local impact. But can you think of moments in your life or just times that you can recall that you say, okay, that's a turning point or that's something of significance?
Bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Okay. The bombing of Pearl Harbor.
That changed everything in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. 9/11? Yeah, I can remember that one.
63
Kennedy was assassinated? Absolutely. Watergate scandal? Yeah. Now we kind of chuckle at that thought, but until that time, there was more of a deep trust in the governing structures than we have in our own day.
Technology, computers.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's accelerated the pace of innovation and in ways that maybe even those who were constructing them from the beginning couldn't realize.
You think that little wrist iPhone that you had on your watch, the power of that thing is 100 times more than what the Apollo 13 was.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. People are carrying supercomputers in their pockets and don't even think about it. Yeah, we're playing Candy Crush on a supercomputer, right? They didn't even have near that technology, and they're sending people to the moon, 50, 60 years ago with that. It's kind of crazy. Yes, sir?
Well, I was going to say landing on the moon.
Landing on the moon. Yeah, that's pretty momentous. A human left Earth, first off, and went to another terrestrial body, i.e. the moon. Yeah, it's pretty significant.
For me, it was basic training.
Basic training, that's right. For your personal life, and who knows what in the future forward, yes. Yeah, and I really appreciate that you said that, Neil, because if you think about it, the occurrences of our lives, we might not name them as being, quote unquote, historic, right? It's just another day in our life, and we don't really think things that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we might not give a second thought. But in truth, everything that happens has an impact on someone else, and that sort of ripple effect throughout history. Someone is here today, or someone's life was changed because of those decisions, right? So we think about those turning points, and the resurrection is not just a turning point for the Christian faith. It's not just a turning point in which we celebrate with some plastic eggs and sugared up bodies. The resurrection is a turning point in human history. Now, why would the resurrection be a turning point in human history? The single most significant event may be paralleled with the incarnation itself. Yeah.
Well, the creation of his church.
Okay, so the church was created on the other side of this resurrected reality. Okay. Victory over death. I mean, how many cultures, how long has humanity struggled with the reality of ceasing to exist in the physical sense? Cultures throughout time and history, even in our own day, there's sort of this anxiety to beat death. And we're trying to use those technologies, right, to try to live forever. All kinds of crazy stuff going on now. But yeah, on that April morning, death was overcome. Not just a temporary, Jesus raised Lazarus, which was a precursor to what was to come. But Lazarus was going to meet that fate once again. Jesus died, was buried, and 3 days came back and didn't return to the grave. Now, people sometimes have a hard time with this reality because they say, well, it's not scientific. Well, there are a multitude of reasons why, not just because of the testimony, but from some of the things that we see throughout history as well, that we can attest that this is a valid occurrence. But, of course, it's not scientific, right? Science implies the ability to replicate something. You have to repeat it over and over and over and over to be able to then make some sort of theory, form a theory, and be able to give some sort of definitive, yes, this can happen within human history. The resurrection, at least so far, has only happened once. But it's not only going to happen once. Yeah, no, I think you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to say that love is still law.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so for those of you who haven't been here on Sunday mornings with us lately, we've been going through the book of Galatians, and we've been about 8 or 9 weeks, something like that. I'm kind of lost count, but in the book of Galatians, and we've been talking a lot about the law and its purpose. And one of the law's purposes was to demonstrate to humanity, and specifically the people of Israel as a sort of a standard bearer for humanity, what sin is, what living contrary to the design of God looks like, and the devastating effects that come as a result of that. And so through the resurrection, Neil said, if you didn't hear him, he said, love won over law, right? The law that would show us our sin, the law that we were incapable of upholding, now has been subsumed through the death and subsequent resurrection of Jesus. Yeah.
I was going to say, the way that came out of it.
Yeah.
The way the involvement of the church and evangelism comes with it to try to save the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no other rationale for the disciples' actions other than it actually happened. Right? I mean, even the writers of the Gospels themselves go to great pains to show how hard it was for the disciples to get their heads around the fact that Jesus was now alive when he was dead. Let's look at Matthew 28. We're gonna have a reading from Matthew 28. We're just going to begin in verse 1. And let's look at the events surrounding the aftermath of the resurrection, sort of immediate in Matthew's account. We're going to read verses 1 through 10, and I like to kind of read around, so I'll just read verse 1, and someone else wants to pick up verse 2, and someone else verse 3, and we'll do that until we get to verse 10. Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave.
And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it.
His appearance was like lightning, his clothing as white as snow.
The heart shook with fear of him and became like dead men.
The angel said to the women,
let's stop there. So the point that's happening here is that Jesus is trying to get them, and you and I had this conversation the other day, trying to get them to meet him in Galilee, right? That's what, and Galilee was the area of focus for most of Jesus' ministry. Jerusalem was the place of focus for most of Jesus' ministry. And so Jesus is trying to go from Galilee to Jerusalem through most of the narratives we have in the Gospels. But now that he has done what he came to do in Jerusalem, now they're starting to work their way back. Galilee is often called the Galilee of the Gentiles. Now, what's a Gentile? A non-Jew, okay? I.e. the nations. So we already see in what Jesus, and what the text says here, what Jesus is intending to do. He's taking what has just occurred and beginning to set it outward in sort of these concentric circles. We see that in Acts 1, with Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. To take this message, and as Barry said, and the church move outward and display his glory over the entire earth. But let's look at this text. We're just going to kind of break it down. And any questions, anything that relates to any of this, feel free to ask. That's why we're here. So now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. So we're just going to stop there for just a second. What are some things, as you just look at that text, that stand out to you? Just these first couple verses here. Yeah, Jake.
That the women were mentioned,
Okay, so why is that significant?
because it was not commonplace to mention women in ancient days.
Absolutely. Yeah, and especially, so you can look in the law in Deuteronomy, and it talks about like in the court of law, when you were going to bring a case before a judge, you would bring 2 or 3 witnesses. 2 was the recommended. And as Jake is saying, in those days, women in general were not allowed to be the ones to bring that case. They weren't allowed to be the witnesses. So here we have Jesus resurrected. And there's an interesting thing about the resurrection is the New Testament actually doesn't describe the resurrection event itself. It doesn't tell us how Jesus came out of the grave and what that looked like and all that happened. It talks about all the events that surround that act. And so here we have the first occurrence after Jesus was resurrected. The 2 women came, and they were coming to finish prepping his body for burial. Yeah.
The other Mary, the mother of Jesus.
It is not. Yeah. In this, it is not. Yeah. I know there's lots of Marys, and they get all confused. But yeah, it's Mary Magdalene, and I think it tells back here in chapter 27.
My notes say it's presumably the mother of James
And
Joseph.
Joseph, yeah. Yeah.
And Luke, it says,
Yeah, yeah. I think it says it in chapter 27 too. Yeah, here it is in verse 56. So, to go with Jake's point, the women were the ones who were actually staying at the cross while the rest of the guys, with the exception of John, kind of skedaddled. That's a theological term. But, they split, right? They left. And so that was significant as well, But here, yeah, among them was Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So yeah, it's in the prior chapter. Yes, ma'am.
Here's something I see this. Okay, verse 1,
Uh-huh.
the 2 Marys went to look at the tomb, so presumably they're there. And in verse 2, you have this violent earthquake,
Yeah.
and the Lord came down from heaven and rolled back the stone and sat on it. To me, that seems as if Mary and Mary were there when this happened, and I've always envisioned that when they got there, the stone was rolled back.
Yeah, it doesn't tell.
I mean, it may not really be sequential. The story.
Right. Yeah, just reading it, I don't know that they saw this occurrence, but they did see the angel after the fact.
Yes.
We do know that. But yeah, you know, there's some scholars who think that Mary were coming to finish prepping his body because of the haste at which all the events took place before the Sabbath. You know, that was sort of the thing, or the Passover rather. It was like, you know, the Passover's coming, Sabbath is coming, we got to kind of rush all this. And so Jesus' body wasn't properly completed. And so that's why they were bringing what they were bringing. And in the meantime, you know, the stone was put there and sealed and guards were placed. I'm not sure about that. I'd have to study it a little more, but I do know that that's what some people think. Somebody, yes, Ms. Jane.
I've always wondered about the violent earthquake. What is the significance of that? You expounded on that. Why was that chosen, or was that common in that area? Of course, it was chosen because the angel came down. And I mean, that was, when you think about what a violent earthquake is,
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The whole area, or, I mean, why
Yeah.
that particular?
Yeah, if you can't hear on the other side, Ms. Jane asked why the violent earthquake. Let me finish answering Jake's question, then I'll get to that question right there. So Jake, not Jake's question, but Jake's comment. Yeah, Jake was right. I mean, nobody trying to prove before a court of law that this had occurred would put in the text, 2 women were the first one to witness this, unless 2 women were the first ones to witness this, right? Unless that's what actually happened, right? And it's also significant because you already see the sort of elevation of the place of women within the faith, and we talked about that last Sunday. You know, there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. We're all one in Jesus. That's in the end of Galatians chapter 3, where now, you know, Jesus is available and accessible. It's not just the priest, right? It's not just this one person, this kind of a couple times a year making intercession. I mean, Jesus is bearing witness before everyone, right? Everyone has the availability. Everyone can access God. Yes?
I was just going to say, Mark, Luke, and John don't mention the earthquake.
Yeah.
When they arrive, the sequence of events, the stone is what been rolled back.
Yeah.
So it's just.
That was 2 earthquakes in 3 days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Friday, the earth shook, the rocks were split, tombs were open. I mean, that's a pretty violent earthquake.
Absolutely.
What was God trying to, that I know that it was a major event.
Right.
Violent earthquake's a major event.
Right. Well, I think one, I mean, so there's a few things that I can see going on, and I'm not saying that I know everything about why all this is happening. But one, it usually, you know, catastrophic weather events accompany the presence of God's action, right? You look in the Old Testament and what happened? Walls of water were separated, right? Massive numbers of quail were brought in and killed for people. You know, manna's falling from the sky. Now, that didn't happen all the time, but, you know, when there were these massive events, generally they were looking for God's divine activity in that event. You know, a bush burning and not consumed. Right? There's something extraordinary that's happening within the natural order. So creation itself is actually a participant in God's saving action or God's working in the world. So that's sort of one aspect that I would say of it. Yeah. Definitely.
I have a question again regarding the women. It seems like we hear more about the women initially after the crucifixion. Historically, would they, I'm just trying to piece in my mind, were they braver, were they more loving, or were they less likely to have consequences? Does that make sense? If like the leader is crucified of a group of people,
Yeah.
or the disciples all scared and in hiding, whereas the women, being women, were less likely to be, I guess, arrested or, you know, for having followed Jesus. Was there a difference in how
Yeah,
they were treated?
that's a great question. Certainly, you know, in terms of the social order, they were not regarded in the same means that men were. So there's absolutely that. And so if they were looking, you know, to your point, if I'm a centurion and I'm looking for these followers of Jesus who could become rabble rousers, you know, I'm going to be looking for the guys who are the ones, because, you know, one of them's a zealot, right? I mean, he is a known enemy of the state. Okay? You have Jesus, who was now crucified, a death that was reserved for, you know, the worst and the insurrectionists. So yes, there is that. But I think that there's another aspect. Luke does this. Matthew does this. Mark does this. The gospel writers go to great lengths to describe the special relationship that Jesus had with women in the ministry there. Now, yes, the 12, as we call them, were all men. But you always see in the text that there were also women who were a part of that group, right? You have, you know, is it Mary who breaks the jar? Is it Mary who anoints Jesus' feet at Bethany, I think it's right? And, you know, Jesus says, anywhere you proclaim this gospel, her story is going to accompany that. You know, there's just this significance, and I think that what Jesus is doing there is he's breaking down the artificial separations that have existed because of the curse, and now is beginning to show what Paul explains in Galatians 3, that all can be with him. Now, in terms of the women accompanying or being present at the cross while the other disciples, you know, there's various reasons for that. We know Peter was denying Jesus. We know Thomas doubted that any of this would happen. You know, there was definitely a spirit of fear and uncertainty among those disciples. You know, they went back, they were going back fishing, right? Going back to their jobs. And yet the women trusted. They were caring for him, right? I mean, if they were coming to finish the anointing, to prep his body for his long-term death, you know, it implies to me a special level of care for him.
I'm wondering if that's not the role of women to do, because in the other accounts it does, or at least two of them, talking about the bringing spices to anoint Jesus' body.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe that was a task that the women.
It very well could have been, yeah, and I'm perfectly fine saying I don't know that history, okay? I don't know that point, but I can certainly look it up. I should, but I don't. You know, in terms of the earthquake aspect, and these are all tremendous questions, I really appreciate it. In terms of the earthquake that happened, so there is the divine aspect that accompanies it. There's something else that Matthew does here that's kind of a wordplay in the text. Yeah, Terry.
I think one of the things we're trying to piece this thing together, but we take into account and focus on the two women. But remember, we've got a centurion group of soldiers there guarding this place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I think really what we're seeing is God saying, I'm going to let the whole world know what's going on.
Absolutely.
First going to deal with the centurion group.
Right.
I'm going to let my power be seen. At the same time as this angel is coming down, I'm going to like loosen that stone that's covering that graveside.
Right.
They're going to feel that. They're going to say what's going on. At the same time, see this angelic being coming down from above. No wonder they'd be fearful and scared.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And then you're standing there all watching this angel do what he's doing, or doing what it's doing. And they're saying, this is the definitely, I remember what he said, you know, about who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you get down to verse 11, and what do these men do? They're going into the city telling what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I really think that's a large part of the significance of how everything went.
Yeah, the focus is certainly on the resurrection, right? I mean, certainly.
God's power being seen that, hey, I'm over heaven and earth, I'm going to move this
Yep.
stone that you thought you were going to keep here.
Yeah,
And my messenger is going to go in and attend to my son.
that's right.
You know,
Yeah,
and
that's
you're
right.
going to observe all of this, and he's coming out of here, and you're going to go tell the people what
Yeah.
you've seen. Remember, their lives are at stake because, you know, their mission was to guard that thing, and to that cost them their life.
Yeah,
You know, he's gone.
yeah, absolutely.
So here you have this
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the key point of this whole text is twofold. There's the aspect of the occurrence of the resurrection and just the sublimity of that happening, right? Then there's the second aspect of, they're going to Galilee. Right? So there's these two sides that are two sides of the same coin. Let me make this one point, and then I'll get to your comment, Barry. So, in terms of the earthquake, if you look down, we haven't read that far yet, but if you look down in verse 4, and since Terry got to the guards, this connects it. So you have the earthquake in verse 2. In verse 4, the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. So I just want you to note both the wordplay that's going on here and the irony. The wordplay is that the same word that's used for earthquake, there's a form of that used to describe the shaking of the centurions when they note what happened. Right? So it may be one thing to just say, okay, they shook in fear, but when you see these two words in the Greek playing out side by side, it's a very violent shaking that they're experiencing. Why is this happening? Well, here you have guards who are guarding a dead man who now are like dead men themselves. Do you see that? And I think that's what Matthew is trying to kind of get us to see here in the text is Jesus is now alive. He was thought to be subjugated to the power of death, the power that was unbreakable. The guards who are a part of the power structure and the powerful one, right, they're soldiers, they're powerful, are now the ones who are afraid. And we would say they're like ghosts, right? They look like a ghost. That's the way we would say it now. I mean, they're like that. Okay, Barry, and then Jamie.
I think Matthew, in the process of writing this, well, in order to demonstrate the power of God and that kind of thing, you go back to chapter 27, verse 50. It's sort of hard to know if these are one and the same earthquake or probably there was an earthquake at the time of Jesus' death from the impact, because we all know that we got all overcast and dark at that time. But over, if you look at verse 51, after he cried in a loud voice and yelled at the ghost, behold, the veil of the temple was rent and plain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were open. I always thought about this occurring at Jesus' death, but the thing is, this was after. Because, and the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints which slept, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city and appeared to them. So this event here is an event that occurred after the resurrection. However, he's got it over in the previous chapter before. And I presume that that's just God's way of giving us a greater idea of the impact of Jesus' death.
Yeah.
And the fact that Matthew, in advance, talks about after his resurrection, tombs being open and people being resurrected along with him after his resurrection.
Right. Yeah, in my mind, it kind of brings up that vision of Ezekiel looking over the valley at all the dead bones, right? There were all these signs that were to accompany this event. And so, and they do, right? When you look at this, they are accompanying this event. Yeah, Jamie. Yeah, it's a great comment, Barry.
This kind of moves on to the next couple of verses.
Uh-huh.
What would you describe as an angel of the Lord? That feels like it's a significant thing that we hear about in the Bible,
Right.
and this is something that was there. How would you
We're bringing the good ones this morning. It's a good question. So the question is it an angel of the Lord or the angel of the Lord? So if it's the angel of the Lord, the definite article would imply that it's a specific being. An angel of the Lord implies it could be one of the multitude. Right. The reason I bring that up is because it can be translated either way. And there's a lot of theology wrapped up in that. So in the Old Testament, the one that we often see most acting on God's behalf, on the Father's behalf, is the angel of the Lord. Right? And the angel of the Lord, many people believe that was a manifestation of Jesus before his incarnation. Okay, so I think if that is true, and I'm not saying it necessarily is, but there is a lot of good evidence for that. If that is true, I think we would have to understand this as an angel of the Lord. But one of the interesting things is in this account of this angel coming, the description of his appearance is very much like Jesus's at the transfiguration in Luke chapter 9. If you go back and look at Luke chapter 9, you see that Jesus, he takes a couple of his disciples up. They're on this mountain, and he goes through a change. Does anyone remember that story? Wait, let's look there. Let's since we're on this subject, let's just flip over there. Luke chapter 9. Other gospel writers recorded as well, but there's a couple points out of Luke's that I'd like to. So beginning in verse 28, it says, Some 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took along Peter, John, and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face became different, and his clothing became white and gleaming. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who appearing in glory were speaking of his, and this word here in verse 31 is really interesting, his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. That word in the Greek is Exodus. So here they are on the mountain with Jesus discussing the Exodus that he's about to lead in Jerusalem. And we have the same type of language about the clothing as we do with the angel here. What is the Exodus that Jesus is leaving? And that may not be a way that we've referred to Jesus' work on the cross or his resurrection as an Exodus or a new Exodus. And what is the Exodus? I know it's kind of a weird word in our day. What is the Exodus?
Verse 31.
You're talking about Luke chapter 9? Yeah. Let me go back there. Yeah, verse 31, yeah. Yeah, that's right. So the Exodus was the occurrence that happened in Egypt back with Moses long ago, right? In which God delivered the people from the bondage of Egypt, from the slavery that they experienced there for hundreds of years. And now you have Jesus doing the same thing. I only bring that up not to get on a rabbit trail, but to say that there is some connection here between this angel and Jesus. I'm not saying the angel isn't Jesus, but there's something significant here in that his appearance was just like Jesus's when he took this transfigured state. And so this angel in Matthew's account, it appears, it deposes the guards, I guess you would say. Everyone's afraid of this being. And then it says, the angel spoke to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who has been crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, just as he said. Come see the place where he was lying. All of these, again, with the earthquake and all this is about the significance of the divine activity that took place. Matthew wants you to know that unlike the lie that's been peddled, that the disciples came in the middle of the night and staged a coup and got Jesus' body out, that no, God actually did this. And he sent an angel, and the angel just means a messenger. And so you have here an angel doing what an angel does. Sometimes angels are called, God is called the Lord of hosts. What that means is God is the God of angelic armies. So here you have a soldier of God who's also a messenger of God sent to this occurrence to reveal himself God's self to these people to show that this wasn't just some human event, that God orchestrated this activity. Is that helpful? Does that helpfully answer your question? Does anybody else have any questions? Before we have like 3 minutes left, and we're in verse 6. So let me read through the rest of it, and if the last 3 verses, 3 or 4 verses here. The angel continues in verse 7, "Go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." And they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to report it to his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and greeted them, and they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and take word to my brothers and sisters, or my brethren, to leave for Galilee, and there they will see me." And so you have the angel testifying to the fact of Jesus' resurrection, and then you have the encounter of the women with Jesus. And then you have their appointed meeting in Galilee.
I just want to make one comment
Yeah.
about, which was alluded to earlier, about the guards. And I think that's why Jesus talked about money the way he did, what the evil that money can bring about in certain ways, is that Judas took money to betray Jesus. Money is used again by the chief priests to pay the guards to lie. And if you look a little further, money is used again because he says, if this news gets back to the governor, we will satisfy him. So that tells me the governor's going to be paid off also. So his death and resurrection was all cheapened by money, and it shows that the money was paid so that the lie of him being taken away by his disciples is still circulating to this day.
Yeah, absolutely.
To this day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have to be really careful. We always hear everybody has a price. TV show, where they sell all that stuff. Well, anyhow,
The price is right.
What's your I don't want to sell price? What's your crazy price?
Yeah.
But they'll come up. They'll come up with something.
Yeah.
We have to be careful with, well, what's our price?
Yeah.
What will we be quiet so we don't rock the boat?
Yeah.
Will we stay quiet so maybe not start an argument? So
Absolutely.
we have to be careful.
Yeah, and that really gets us to our application point of this class is, look, the resurrection happened, and it changed everything. We're going to talk more about that in the message this morning, but it changed everything. Yeah, Earl, last comment.
I just have to share this because a little 2 years ago, I ended up introduced to Jerusalem. There are 2 locations in the modern day Jerusalem that are believed to be perhaps the tomb which Jesus was laid. One is in a building called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which for centuries has been maintained as the burial place of Jesus. The other is another place called the Garden Tomb, and that was discovered in the 1800s. Archaeologists and apostles they argue back and forth which one is the real tomb. The reason I mention this is I want to see both of them. They're both interesting.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. We're still looking for Jesus in the tomb, right? Yeah, absolutely. That was awesome. Great point. Class dismissed. Thank you, Earl. That's wonderful.
I cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree, his body bound and drenched in tears. They laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance seat.